Here's what you're missing over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
A little stuffy nose. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode, not edition. Well, I guess it's the same thing, of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we have our friend Greg Elder back on. You recall that we did an episode with him a while ago about the Bureau of Military Information, the BMI, the Union Army, the Union Army's intelligence system that came into place just before the Battle of Chancellorsville, right? Yeah. And so what did the Confederates do? Did they have a BMI? How did they gather intelligence? Some in the audience might say the word Confederate and intelligence do not belong in the same sentence, for who could be so intelligent as to try to break away from the United States? But you know what? We're not going to say that here. So for those of you in the audience who are saying that, please keep those thoughts to yourselves. That's not what we are here to do. Without praise or censure, we are just talking about facts. Cold, hard facts. Greg Elder, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me again.
Greg, last time you were on, I recommended you watch Kunk on Earth, and you did, and we were just talking about how much you loved it, and so I just wanted to say to everybody, Greg is a very smart man, an accomplished man, and he has taken my recommendation for Kunk on Earth and loves it. So if you haven't checked it out yet on Netflix, you should.
Well, you know, what is truly fascinating about your liking Conk on Earth is how much you look like the host.
Oh, yes. Yes. I look just like her. Yeah. I do have a crush on her, though. She's a funny, cute girl. You can't beat it. You can't beat it.
I'm married, so I have to say that I disagree.
Well, I will tell you, as a confirmed bachelor, nothing beats cute. I'm not talking, Pam Anderson. I'm talking cute and funny. Nothing beats it. Actually, that beats Pam Anderson. I never really liked Pam Anderson anyway. So that's not what the show is about.
Again, I'm married and no comment.
Of course. I'm just rambling. I'm warming up. All right, so let's get into the Confederate intelligence. A lot of people, when we have them on the show and we talk about the Confederacy, or just more specifically, the Army of Northern Virginia here at Gettysburg, they often say that one of the many problems was a failure of intelligence. There was no intelligence.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, it's even overstating it to say they had no intelligence. I mean, they had literally negative intelligence.
Less than intelligence.
Because no intelligence can sometimes at least not get you into trouble, right?
Right. Having
really bad intelligence, which was, we discussed with the Union in the first 2 years of the war, having really bad intelligence can actually act as a detractor. When you have 87,000 men and you think that you're fighting 200,000 men, when you're actually fighting 40,000 men, right? That can act as not just zero, that acts as a really big detractor. And truly, when you reach Gettysburg for the Confederates, the lack of intelligence is also hampered by the fact that what information Lee is getting in some cases is actually completely bad information that is forcing or compelling him to make choices that aren't necessarily in the best interest of the Army of Northern Virginia.
So there's the problem. There's Gettysburg. Now let's go back. What was the intelligence system like for the Army of Northern Virginia whilst in Virginia?
Yeah, and so like we talked about it before we started the podcast today. The really interesting thing is the best intelligence campaign that the Confederates had in virtually the entire war is the very first battle they fight in at the Battle of Bull Run, because shortly before that, there's what's called the war clerks, which is as the southern states were seceding, the War Department itself was largely filled with a lot of Southerners. Washington, D.C. is a southern city, so there's a lot of sympathizers in Washington, D.C. There's a active telegraph between Washington, D.C. and Richmond that isn't shut down until, almost the time that the war breaks out. So there's a lot of information being gathered in Washington, D.C., and it's making its way out through couriers like with Elizabeth. I'm sorry, not Elizabeth. There's my Union mind, Elizabeth Van Loo. Sorry. Anyway, there's making it out via couriers out to the Confederate lines. It's making its way via the telegraph line, and then of course the southern line between Washington and Richmond for moving newspapers, which is the one thing that stays throughout the entire Civil War. So the one thing the Confederates are able to do throughout the war, they develop a courier network from Washington, D.C. to Richmond. Several couriers and facilitators moving newspapers every single day. Within 24 hours, you could get newspapers from Washington to Richmond, and that was 7 or 8 national newspapers a day making its way south. So in the very beginning of the war, you had spies in place. You had courier lines. You had newspapers. Lots of rich information from the tactical level, where the Confederates were always better at the outset in their use of cavalry. So you had tactical intelligence. You had a lot of sympathizers out near Bull Run and Manassas who knew the area and who were looking out for the movement of anybody suspicious. So you had really good tactical information. You had operational intelligence, for regional kind of intelligence, through newspapers and also through operatives and guerrillas and such, and then strategic intelligence. The Confederates have newspapers, and then they have these spies in Washington, D.C. Well, after the Battle of Bull Run, the spy networks collapse because these aren't very good spies. They're not very effective. They make mistakes, and so they're arrested and rolled up. The Union never allows another major spy network in Washington, D.C. In fact, at one point, the Confederates develop a courier network between Richmond and Canada because a lot of the messages that are making their way to Richmond or to the Confederacy because of the Union blockade, the Confederates actually use ships going from Canada to Britain to share information on what's going on in Europe. Sorry, excuse me.
Interesting.
Well, the Union busted that up. They essentially turned the operative who was moving the communications back and forth between Richmond and Canada and turned him. And so every time he would go north, he would stop in Washington, turn over the information, make his way up to Canada, get new information, and on his way back down to Richmond, he would stop in Washington again. So the Union was very well informed, and from a counterintelligence perspective, of kind of what the Confederate information moving back and forth from Europe was. They knew about, obviously the efforts to try to bring England and France into the fold to help them out. So early on, the Union was able to break the kind of communications and information flow from Europe. They stopped a lot of the spies in Washington, despite the fact it being a very sympathetic city. And that never gets reinvigorated. So early on in the war, the Confederates lose visibility into what's happening in Washington, D.C. Now, to some degree, that isn't the end of the world because the newspapers are so terrible.
Was it Sherman who said he wanted to hang newspaper reporters as spies?
Yeah. Well, there's a great amount of information on Sherman and the press, because they call him a lunatic and he's out of his mind in 1862. And to be frank, he kind of was. But at one point in 1864, he tells the press corps that are embedded with his army, he says, look, if any of you, we just had a setback today. If any of you tell your newspaper this and it gets reported, I'm going to try you as a spy. As far as I'm concerned, you're here under Union uniform. You're operating in our lines. So therefore, I'm going to treat you like Union soldiers. And if you divulge information, I'm going to treat you as spies. So sure enough, the newspaper reports it. He gets that, and he literally says, okay, we're going to have a tribunal. You're going to get hung. You're dead. I've had it. Like a single newspaperman is more damaging than an entire corps of infantry from the Confederates. And it takes Grant wiring down and calming Sherman down and saying, that really isn't the best thing for the Union cause right now. Right. We kind of need the press on our side. We got enough big problems going on. We don't need you executing.
Yeah. As right as you are, William, they are worse than a corps of the enemy. but we need them.
You know, and it's something that's humorous within the intelligence community today. You know, like, you mean what? The press would do something that would damage national security? Well, that's crazy talk. You know,
it seems like they try to do that on purpose nowadays.
It does from time to time seem like that. So the thing is, the Confederates always had that press going down, and it's incidental. It's interesting that when Lincoln is assassinated, that John Wilkes Booth uses that same courier network, the exact same facilitation line from Washington, D.C., that enables him to move south and cross the Potomac River into Virginia.
Now, how would he know that?
Because he had maintained communications with he knew the courier networks, he knew the sympathizers, he knew how to use that.
Is that why? Have you heard some of the Lincoln conspiracy theories, like the JFK ones, but with Lincoln?
Yeah, I saw something about him being a zombie or like a vampire and all that too.
Not that one, no. No, about his assassination and that it was, you know, a bigger plot than just Crazy Booth and a couple of losers that were with him. And but something like that he was familiar with the spy route and everything like that. Then I guess that's where people get these ideas, as they hear things like that and they go, oh, well, why would an actor be familiar with a route that spies take unless he was one of them? And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the Confederate government, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course, that had to have been the Richmond government.
Right. Which was all falling apart by that point.
Some of these conspiracies, though, are derived at least from the fact that we know, you know, about the communications courier networks going up to Canada. We know about Davis authorizing the guerrillas to cross the Canadian border to conduct strikes into the north, and of course the big plot in New York City to burn the entire city to the ground. I when I was doing counterterrorism, I would ask people, you know, like, so what was the largest terrorist attack or attempted a terrorist attack like in New York before 9/11? And they would always say like 1993, the World Trade Center bombing there. Actually, it was Confederates trying to burn the entire city to the ground, and the museum, the Barnum and Bailey Museum in New York City.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
In the movie, there was a movie that came out just recently. It's awful. I think it's awful.
With Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, the musical. And they have a bunch of, you know, thugs and everything, like, burn the museum to the ground because they don't want to see, you know,
elephants.
The elephants and weird people in a museum.
Right.
Well, actually, it was one of the Confederate operatives walking by. He had one firebomb left. It was called Greek fire. It was napalm, essentially. He had one left. He threw it in the museum and burnt it to the ground. They were trying to burn the city to the ground. The only reason it failed is because most of the operatives, when they went to the hotels and set the bombs off, they didn't open the windows enough to keep air going.
So it ate up all the oxygen.
So they burnt a couple of hotels down. They certainly burned a lot of hotel rooms. And if the fires had really gotten going, because New York City was so much wood at the time,
right,
it might have burned the city to the ground. But during one of the times when the operatives were looking at New York City, there was a guy named John Wilkes Booth who was just a couple blocks away, conducting a play in New York City. And so it's those types of things you say, well, there's no way that John Wilkes Booth could have been doing a play up in New York City at the same time that operatives are, you know, going and doing these conducting these operations.
But why not?
Yeah.
Why? How is there no way? Right? That's the thing about conspiracy theories, is that John Wilkes Booth is someone special, and in a bad way in this case, after the fact, like now. But at that time, he was an actor working.
Right.
He was a working
major actor.
A huge actor.
Everybody knew John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't understand how people, you know what it is. I've always had this theory that conspiracy theorists are really the best creative writers that we have to offer, but they choose to use that talent for bullshit. And probably because you can make more money a lot easier in the conspiracy theory cottage industry than you can in novelists.
So that's what I've been doing wrong my entire life so far. I've been going down the wrong damn field.
Yeah. See, with all the intelligence information and everything that you're aware of and everything like that, you could craft a very cool conspiracy theory out of something
and make some real money.
Yeah, exactly. You'd be a millionaire. Oliver Stone will make a movie out of it.
But so
anyway, back to the point.
So at the beginning of the war, the Confederates actually have this indigenous capability in D.C. They have really good cavalry, and then the other thing that was interesting that you see right away that stays the case throughout the entire war is local sympathizers are the basis of most of their information.
That's a huge help for them.
So as the Confederate Army, the Union Army is moving from Washington, D.C. out to Manassas in the very first Bull Run campaign. They're not only operating knowing the size of the Union forces, because the newspapers have literally divulged it all. They not only knew the day that the Union forces were going to march out because spies had revealed the information. As the Union Army was progressing to the battlefield, a bunch of the officers stayed in a farmhouse, for instance, one night.
Listen to the rest of this interview and dozens like it. Support the show and get early access to special episodes, early and discounted ticket sales, and more. The second lieutenant level and above gets access to all monthly Patreon episodes. So please go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, choose a tier, and join. And I thank you in advance.